In this video, we're going to update the firmware on your EdgeTX radio to the latest version. We're going to talk about some quality of life things related to backing up and restoring the contents of your radio. And I want to start by saying that the stuff in this video is it's technically optional. Some people, when they try to flash their radio for whatever, it almost always goes smoothly, but then sometimes they get themselves in a little bit of a weird situation, and then maybe their radio got halfway through flashing and isn't working anymore, and that can be super annoying and frustrating. If you've never flashed a radio before, or if you're just super new to this and that would be super frustrating for you, you can skip this video and not flash your radio. But someday you're going to want to flash your radio and you're going to want to know the information that's in here. And if today is that day, then here's the information you need. And before we get into that content, you should know that this video is part of a series where I go through a whole bunch of information about EdgeTX, the operating system that runs on our radios, to try and teach people more about it. A lot of people know the basics of using it, just enough to get by on a day-to-day basis, but they don't know, when you go through all these menus, what do they do? And how do you get the radio to do what you really want it to do? That's what this video series is about. And there's a whole playlist. I want to invite you after you finish this video to check out that playlist. It's got a whole bunch of information about EdgeTX and will make you a whole lot smarter about how to use your radio. That's linked in the video description below when you get to the end of this one. And the first thing I want to show you how to do is find out what version of EdgeTX is on your radio. Here on my Radio Master Zorro, I'm going to press the Sys key, and that's going to take me to the Tools menu. And then I will press the Page key till I get to the Version menu. And in the Version menu, I can see I am running EdgeTX for the Zorro, and this is firmware version 2.6.0. If we try to do that same thing on a Jumper T Pro, you're going to notice that there isn't a Sys key. Instead, on this style of radio, there is simply one button that's used for menu, and that button is either the model button or the Sys button, depending on whether it's short or long pressed. We haven't talked about the model button yet in this series, but instead of pressing the Sys key, I will just long press the menu key, and you can see here, it's pretty zoomed out, but it also takes me to the Tools menu, and then I can page through. And as we discussed in the last video, this radio doesn't have a page forward or page back. I can just short press or long press to go forward or back. On a color touchscreen radio, the process is almost the same. Here I've got a Sys key, and if I short press the Sys key, it takes me to Tools just like before. And if I page, it'll take me to the Version as before. I can read that information off. I can also tap on the touchscreen to bring this menu up, and then if I go to radio settings, then I can go to the version screen as well and get that same information. So now I know which version of EdgeTX is on my radio. How do I know what the latest is? And how do I flash it if I'm not on the latest? The answer to that question is this website, EdgeTX Buddy, and that's linked in the video description below, although you should probably bookmark it, or I always just type EdgeTX Buddy into my search bar and find it. And if we look here, we can see that the latest firmware version available is EdgeTX Centurion 2.10.4. If you're not on that version, then you may want to update. Here's how you would do that. In order to update firmware on the radio needs to be in DFU, or programming mode. And the way that we do that on almost all of these radios is we power the radio down. In fact, you don't even need batteries in it, although it won't hurt if the batteries are installed. When the radio is powered down and when we plug in USB, the radio will enter programming mode, and then we can flash the firmware on the radio. Now, some of you are noticing that I have USB plugged into this radio already. On Radio Master radios, there is a USB port on the bottom that is used for charging and a USB port on the top that is used for flashing, and we're going to be using the one on the top for flashing. On Jumper radios, there is a single USB port on top, and it is used for both charging and flashing. If you have a Jumper radio, like the Jumper T Pro, T15, or T14, simply plugging in USB with the power off will not put the radio into bootloader mode. On these radios, there is a button that is accessible right next to the USB port. You can see it here on my T Pro and right here on my T15. On these radios, what you need to do is you need to press that button and hold it down while you plug in USB. And that's how you put the radio into programming, bootloader, DFU, or whatever you want to call it, into that mode. So with the radio powered down, I'm going to go ahead and plug in to the USB port on top of the radio, and the radio will go into DFU mode. Now there won't be any indication that that's happened until later in the process. The next thing we need to do is tell EdgeTX Buddy what radio model we have, and we're going to do that here in this pull down. And the simplest thing to do is just type the name of your radio, like Zorro. Here's the Radio Master Zorro. If you're not sure, you can go back to that version screen and it should give the name of the radio or the name of the firmware that's on there. Although sometimes in some rare cases, it comes from the manufacturer with some oddball firmware on there that's not correct for what you're going to choose to flash. Also, you need to know, like if I type the jumper T Pro in here, do you see that there are several different versions of the T Pro? There's the T Pro, the T Pro S, and the T Pro V2. And if you are in a situation where there's several different versions of your radio, you would want to be sure that you are flashing the correct one. If you do flash the wrong one, it's not going to break your radio, but I mean, your radio will stop working. It won't permanently break it. You can just go back and reflash it with the correct one, but you're going to want to like take the extra step to make sure that you're flashing the correct firmware before you go. Like here on the T Pro, I can see that the name is T Pro and not T Pro S or T Pro V2, and that suggests that T Pro would be the correct firmware for me to flash. So with the correct radio model and correct EdgeTX version selected, we are going to hit flash via USB. By the way, you have to be doing this in Chrome browser. It might work on other Chromium-based browsers. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that the USB serial stuff doesn't work on things like Opera or Firefox. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it does or doesn't work on, but I know it works on Chrome, and I know it doesn't work on some other browsers. So be using Chrome, even if you hate Chrome, just for this once. We'll hit flash via USB. Then what we need to do is hit Add New Device, and we should see here, STM32 bootloader. Now, if you don't see STM32 bootloader there, or if God forbid you see more than one STM32 bootloader, then you have to pause. You want to make sure that you're flashing the right device. If you don't see STM32 bootloader, what you need to do is you need to search for Impulse RC Driver Fixer. Impulse RC Driver Fixer is the keyword you want, and you're going to download the Impulse RC Driver Fixer from this link right here. It's just an exe. There's no installer. There's nothing. It's just an executable that comes down from the internet. And with the radio connected and in bootloader mode, you're going to run Impulse RC Driver Fixer, and it's going to fix your driver, and then you'll be able to proceed. By the way, that is a Windows-only thing. This problem doesn't arrive on macOS. On macOS, does this even work on macOS? I have no idea. But macOS doesn't have this driver problem that Windows does. If you do run into it, that's how you fix it. So we'll hit Add New Device. We'll select the STM32 bootloader, and we will connect. And then we'll hit Next and start flashing. And then this process should go completely smoothly. It basically always does in my experience. There you go. Flashing done. The next thing we want to do is set up our SD card. So all of these radios have an SD card in them, and key information about the operating system is stored on the SD card. The radio basically doesn't work without the SD card. Before you update the SD card contents for the new version of EdgeTX, I'm going to highly recommend that you back up the SD card. And you're going to do that just by removing the SD card from the radio. You may need to look on the Zorro. It is fairly accessible from the outside of the radio. You copy the contents of that SD card to a folder on your computer, and you save them just in case anything goes wrong. You won't have lost that contents. And then later, if things go wrong, you could always flash back to an older version of EdgeTX, and you could put that contents back on the SD card and be back where you started from. There's one more thing I want to say, and that is that the SD cards that come with these radios from the factory are garbage. They're garbage. A lot of times they work for a while, and then eventually they always fail. The symptom that they fail is, number one, your radio could start up really slowly. It just takes forever to boot up. It could throw an error like just the SD card is not found. They always fail eventually though, and I would recommend as just a matter of course that you just buy. You don't even have to buy a big 256 gig. It could be, look, this thing is 256 megabytes. It's tiny. If you could find just a good quality 2 gigabyte Samsung or Kingston or some name brand card, it would be better than this. And I highly recommend you do that. Just take this SD card out, copy the contents to another SD card and put it back in your radio, and you'll be good to go basically forever. If your SD card is not easily accessible, here's how you can, oh, don't fall in the radio. It's falling in the radio. It went in crooked and it's falling in the radio. Brilliant. I love it. First, you're going to remove USB from the radio to take it out of bootloader mode. Then you're going to power the radio up.
Welcome to EdgeTX.
Then, with the radio powered up, you're going to plug USB back in on the top of the radio. And it's going to ask you what mode you want the USB to be in. And you're going to select USB storage SD. And then your SD card is going to pop up on your computer as if it was in a card reader. So you can see here I've got USB drive J, and that is what your SD card contents will look like. Whether you put the SD card into a card reader and take it out of the radio, or whether you use the radio's USB, you're going to have the USB drive mounted, and then you're going to do this. We're going to click Set up your SD card, or we're just going to click up here for SD card content. We're going to select our SD card, and you can see here I've got USB drive J. Make sure you select the right drive because we're going to delete files and write files, and if you select the wrong drive, it'll mess up whatever drive you select. We'll hit Select Folder. We'll give permission here, and then we'll select our firmware version, Centurion, and we'll select our radio model, Zorro. And we also need to select our sound pack. You can select the voice language. That's the voice language that you're using. And I'm just going to select English here. And I'm going to apply these changes. And it's going to write that to the SD card, and then we'll be done. At this point, you should have a radio with the latest version of EdgeTX on it. And as new versions come out, you should know how you can update to take advantage of the latest and greatest features that the EdgeTX devs add. We're going to continue with this series with the next video in the playlist. The playlist is on a card on screen or linked in the video description below, and I will see you there.